Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today we're doing a Shanghainese dish called lion head's meatball, or Shizitou. I might be mispronouncing that. My Mandarin's really bad. It's called, but in English it's called a lion's head meatball. I do not know why it's called lion's head meatball. I think that's just something that people call it. But it's definitely, for me at least, a Chinese comfort food, something that I've been eating since I was a little kid. And it's essentially a very large meatball with like a dark soy sauce braise. So we're going to be frying a pork meatball with a lot of fat. Super important that the pork meatballs have lots and lots of fat. Otherwise they don't work. You won't be able to get a good sear on that meatball without that fat. If you don't have lots of fat in your pork, then you're going to end up burning it instead of searing it. So that's really important, is all of that fat. So, if you have any questions, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about lion's head meatball or Chinese cooking or wok cooking or anything really, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least fun to watch. As with pretty much everything that I cook on stream, there's also a recipe that goes along with this particular dish. Almost everything that I cook on stream, not everything, but almost everything that I cook on stream has a recipe that goes along with it. Those usually come out every Friday, so this lion's head meatball recipe came out, I want to say back in like November or December of last year, something like that. And it was part of a series that I've been doing where I've been reproducing a lot of food from like the SF Bay area restaurant scenes. This one comes from a restaurant in San Francisco called Dragon's House. So if you happen to live in the area, you might know it. I think they closed about 10 years ago now. But when I was a kid, I used to eat there all the time with my family. So that is what my version is based off of. So if you're looking for that, all of those recipes, they always live over on the YouTube channel. Those are out every Friday. So over on YouTube, there's new recipes coming out every Friday. Last Friday, we came out with a recipe for egg foo young, or that was beef chow fun. I forget what else came after that or before that. Tomorrow is a Friday, so next Friday, as in tomorrow, we're going to be doing some dan dan mian that's coming out tomorrow, which is a sesame paste noodle dish. So all of that lives over on the YouTube channel, so if you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend it. I know we also concurrently live stream over there on the YouTube, which would be the laptop behind me. So if you're looking for the schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking, that all lives over on the YouTube channel too. So if you were watching over on YouTube, you would have known a couple of weeks ago that I'd be doing this. I think it's about two or 3 weeks out now. That all lives over on YouTube though, so if you're trying to find out that information, that's a good place to be. Lots of fun content popping up over there. We're working our way to 3,500 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit the subscriber goal, boop the subscribe button. Cool. So you will notice, or hopefully you'll notice, that I'm dicing up, or I'm chopping up double the quantity of garlic and ginger that I normally would. Where normally we would start by crushing and mincing about 4 cloves of garlic, and then fine mincing 1 tablespoon or about 1 inch's worth of ginger. Today we're doubling that because both the garlic and the ginger is going to come up in 2 different places today. The first instance is going to come up in the wok fry itself as a part of our braise, and the second instance is actually going to come up in the meatball itself. So the meatballs themselves both also have garlic and ginger, so it will be present in 2 different places. So for this particular recipe, we're doing 8 cloves of garlic, or about half a head of garlic, and about 2 inches of worth of ginger, half of which ends up in the meatballs, and half of which ends up is going to be set aside for our wok fry. So this right now will be the ginger or garlic for our wok fry. So I'm going to set this aside, and this is going to go into our wok fry with the rest of our veggies. So I think there's only 1 veggie in this particular dish today. We're using some baby bok choy. So when we start stir frying our baby bok choy, this garlic and ginger, it's going to go in first. So we're going to set that aside for that fry. And then next up, we're going to start working on our ginger. So I'm going to do 1 inch of ginger first, and this is going to go into our meatballs. So just like any other piece of ginger, especially when it's super, super fresh. You'll notice that I'm not using a potato peeler today. What we're using instead is just a plain old spoon. We're using the flat side of the spoon here to pull off all of that skin. So especially when your ginger is really, really fresh, you'll notice that it comes off really, really easily, which is super helpful with ginger because ginger has a lot of weird nooks and crannies that like a potato peeler would not particularly be able to get into. So you'll notice there's this weird little crevice right here, for example, which we would not be able to get to that with a potato peeler. But works really well with the spoon. So same thing, I'm going to do another inch of ginger, or kind of estimating. And this second half is going to go into our wok fry instead. So I guess if we were really paying attention, probably could have just chopped this all up at once, but I forgot. So, for our garlic, you will have noticed that I didn't actually do very much to the garlic. All I really did was crush it, and then I did a quick chop to it, and that pretty much is everything that you need to do with your garlic, because it's really, really delicate. For ginger, however, it is a pretty durable veggie, which means that we actually do need to do the fine mince. If you don't like doing fine minces, you can also just microplane. Get a microplane and then grate that stuff straight into your wok fry, which I know lots of people like to do because it's a lot easier. But if you've ever tried to clean a microplane, it's a real pain in the butt. So I never get my microplane out unless I absolutely have to. So this is the first half of our garlic or ginger, which I'm going to put right into my bowl, and this is going to be the bowl for our meatballs. So that's my garlic and ginger, and we're going to start building out our meatballs in this bowl. And then the second half of my ginger, so the second half right here, we're going to do the exact same thing, but we're going to set it aside for the wok fry. So I'm starting off with a rough dice here first. Same thing, slices down the center for my rough dice, 1 down the middle, and then chop away. And then once you have your rough dice, we can go through and get our mince here. And there's no real trick to a fine mince, it's really just about persistence. And I suppose having a really, really fine knife, or a sharp knife. Sometimes I give up a little bit early, but that ought to do it. So for our second half, we're going to put this ginger aside, and this is going to go straight into our wok fry with our veggies. So our veggie wok fry is going to be garlic, ginger, and baby bok choy today. So. Yeah. Oh, if you give it a good. Oh, that's a good tip, actually, Sarah. If you give it a good rinse when you're done, right after you're done with it, it will clean pretty easily. I didn't know that. I might actually try that. Usually, when I use my microplane, I think like the only thing that I use the microplane for is Parmesan cheese. That might be the only thing that I actually grate. And usually I'm doing that at the dinner table. So I've never actually tried to clean it immediately after. That's a good tip though. I might actually try that. That's smart. Just like a wok, yeah. Chopping is faster. Oh yeah, that's true. Cool. So next up, we're gonna get to work on our meatballs here. So before we get to our ground pork, I'm gonna do pretty much everything else so that we don't start getting pork everywhere. And there's no real finesse to this. We're really just going to be tossing everything into this bowl here. So I'm starting off with, this is my garlic and ginger in my bowl first. And next up, these are about 5 or maybe a tablespoon of fine minced watercress or water chestnuts. So if you can't find water chestnuts, you can use pretty much anything that's crunchy. I would most likely suggest anything that's crunchy and also doesn't have too much of a taste to it. So water chestnuts, they don't really taste like much. But they are really, really crunchy, so it gives, when you put them in a meatball, there's a nice bit of crunch to it, especially if you give it a nice fine mince. so nothing really pops out too much. My second best suggestion after water chestnuts is always bamboo shoots. I love using bamboo shoots next because bamboo shoots also don't really taste like much to me. And if you fine mince it, you can get a nice little bit of crunch. I saw someone suggested once using jicama instead of water chestnuts, which is also a good alternative too. All of which, I feel like all of which are about equally as difficult to find. So, but really, anything that you can get your hands on that doesn't have too much of a flavor to it. So they have like the texture of an apple, but I wouldn't recommend using an apple because that would be probably a little too sweet. So I'm not quite doing a fine mince here. I like to stop a little bit early on the fine mince with my water chestnuts because I want to have them a little bit of unusual shapes to it. I'm actually stopping a little bit early. You can kind of tell that my water chestnuts, they have some like odd bits in shape, like sizes to it. And that's essentially just from stopping the mince a little bit too early. So if we were really trying to go for a fine mince, that'd probably be a problem. With anything that you're actually trying to fine mince, because there's going to be like large chunks of stuff. So if I did that with my ginger, it would be a problem because there would be weird like errant pieces of ginger floating around in my stir fry. But I love stopping a little bit early with the water chestnuts because it gives this like nice, like interesting little bit of crunch that comes out of nowhere sometimes, which is nice. So that's going to give our meatballs this nice little bit of texture when we get to it. Let's see. Finish this. Cool. Next up is a single egg, followed by, this is a half cup of panko breadcrumb. So, if you're keeping track, a truly traditional lion's head meatball or Shizitou does not contain panko. Obviously, if you're familiar with panko breadcrumb, that should be pretty obvious because panko breadcrumb does not come from Chinese food, it comes from Japanese food. But I actually think that it works really, really well because it creates this really, really nice, like tender meatball that you otherwise would not be able to do without the panko. So I love using it. I mostly derive that technique coming from how you would do a Swedish meatball, which uses panko breadcrumb too. I believe it uses panko, or I guess like is commonly uses panko. More traditionally, a lion's head meatball would not use panko. It would probably instead be using something like cornstarch or potato starch, or any kind of real starch. You'd probably use even flour. I don't like that. I actually found that like using those starches as a binder doesn't quite give that like same level of tenderness that you would get from panko breadcrumb. So my dad insists on using cornstarch when he makes this dish, but I actually love using panko. Cool. Alright, next up for the main event, we're getting to our ground pork. So today I actually do have ground pork, so I'm going to be using 50% ground pork, so this is 8 ounces of ground pork. And then, actually let's just use all of it. We're going to do all ground pork. So this is going to be 1 pound of ground pork here. I was planning on splitting it into halves, but I just realized that I forgot to defrost the other half. So. So that's our ground pork going in. It is very, very fatty. So if you've ever worked with ground pork before, you'll know that ground pork is extremely fatty, which is why you saw so much liquid coming off of my pork. That is exactly what we're looking for, is all of that fat. You can't make this dish without ground pork, without all of that fat. So if you don't have ground pork, you could use anything that's fatty. I've done it with ground turkey, which works really great. I've also done it with 80-20 beef chuck, which also works really, really great because it has a lot of fat to it. I have also attempted to make this with lean cuts of ground beef or ground meats. I think I did it once with I think 93.7 ground beef, and it did not work at all. It definitely started to burn. And that's because all of that fat is really, really essential in the sear process of the meatball. Without that fat, what will happen instead of the sear happening, it will just start burning instead, which is not what we're after. So going into our meatballs, this is going to be a few different things for our seasoning. I'm starting off, that's 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and 2 tablespoons of sesame oil going in first. Follow next by our dry spices. So this is going to be half a teaspoon, let's say half a teaspoon, each of, first is Chinese 5 spice, which has a few, I can't remember all 5 of the spices in Chinese 5 spice. But to me, the ones that really stick out and are really, really prominent is a little bit of cinnamon, that's a really big one for me, and a little bit of star anise, which is another really big one for me. So if you can't find Chinese 5 spice, those are the first 2 dry spices that I would add instead. And yeah, that's it. So we're gonna mix this up and make some meatballs. A quick rinse and 1 or 2 wipes with a sponge. Yeah, that's good to know. I will definitely try that, Sarah. Thank you. Good tip. So you'll notice a couple of things happening while we start mixing this. The main thing that's happening, or at least the main thing that I observe happening, is that the panko breadcrumb is playing a big part in making sure that everything stays nice and well binded. Without that panko, you're going to have a lot of trouble binding. And hypothetically, if you're, say, especially if you're trying to keep it gluten-free, you could use cornstarch instead. And hypothetically, that cornstarch should keep it bound just as well, which in my experience it actually works well as a binder, but I found that it doesn't yield the same level of like tenderness in the meatball as it does with panko. So, but if you are trying to keep this gluten-free, that's the first thing that I would suggest is either panko, cornstarch or potato starch. 2 really great options to binding this together. All right. So I'm going to make some meatballs next here. And we are definitely going to start weighing these out. That's going to be really important. What I usually like to do when I weigh these out, we're going to look for 8 meatballs in total. What I like to do is set a tray on my scale here. And then what I like to do is empty the bowl out into the tray first so we can tell exactly how much this meatball mixture altogether weighs. So we know we're using a pound or 16 ounces of ground pork, but we want to know is how much does the whole mixture weigh so that we can divide it by 8. So mine is 22.6 ounces, which divided by 8 should be about 2.8 ounces per meatball. So if you're feeling lazy, you could totally just skip that and just wing it. I have stopped doing that because every time that I try and do that, what I usually will end up with is 1 meatball at the very end that's either too large or too small, which is not fun. Because usually if it's too small, it's gonna burn, and if it's too large, it's gonna undercook. So that's really annoying. So if you're really trying to be super accurate, make sure that every meatball is identical. Make sure that they weigh the same, otherwise you're gonna run into problems. So I'm tearing my scale so the scale is at 0'd out, and then what we're going to do is add 2.8 ounces of meat per ball. And this should yield 8 meatballs altogether. We want to generally be relatively careful with making sure that everything is packed tightly. You really don't want these meatballs to come apart in the wok fry because all kinds of terrible things will happen if it splits in the wok. Probably the worst thing that has happened to me is that it will literally just fall apart and then you'll be eating like sauteed pork, which is not fun. So do your best, make sure that these are pretty well packed. Hope to God that they're not going to fall apart. Usually when I do this, probably at least one will break. And hopefully if you if it doesn't break too badly, you can generally save it. But do your best to make sure that it doesn't split. No one likes a broken meatball. Alright. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST, doing random things that I'm generally cooking for dinner. Most of the time, they're things that happen in a wok. And if they're not happening in a wok, they're generally things that I have adapted from wok cooking to do in like a cast iron pan or something that's a little bit more home range friendly. Today we're doing a Shanghainese dish called Lion's Head Meatball. Lion's Head Meatball is essentially just a Chinese meatball, but more or less what we're going to be doing is frying them in a very, very hot wok first, and then removing them, and then flash cooking our veggies, and then adding them back in a long braise. So we're going to braise it for, that braise will probably go for, I don't know, like 5 minutes, maybe a little bit less than 5 minutes. And that's going to be where all of like the depth of flavor and all of that really like nice dark flavor comes from in that sauce, because it all comes from, I believe, actually, in my opinion, that all that flavor, it comes from a couple of different sources, but the main place that that flavor comes from lives in dark soy sauce and oyster sauce. So those are going to be the two big ones. If you're keeping track and if you follow my recipes before, those are going to be the same two ingredients that we use in a couple of things, but mainly pad see ew, pad ki mao, and chow fun, all three of which come up in all three of those dishes. So if you have any questions for me, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about Lion's Head Meatballs, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative or fun to watch at least. If you're looking for the recipes, those all live over on my YouTube channel. That's if you're watching on Reddit, the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the channel you're already on. And over there, every Friday, we have new recipes coming out. So I believe the Lion's Head Meatball recipe that we're cooking through right now came out over on the YouTube channel sometime over the winter, I think. It was a couple months ago. And that's over on the channel, so if you haven't checked those recipe videos out, those are really, really fun to check out. In those recipes, we generally move a little bit slower and kind of like talk through some of the decision making that goes behind everything that I'm doing, and like why I leave certain things out, why I make certain decisions, and stuff like that. So lots of fun content popping up over on the YouTube. So those are our meatballs. We're going to set these aside for our wok fry and knock out a few more things before we start cooking. Up next, what we're going to do is, what do we have to do? Next up, we're going to chop up some bok choy here. So, today we're using, this is going to be some baby bok choy. If you don't like bok choy, you could sub it with pretty much any other kind of veggie that you want. I think the original version that I had modeled this particular recipe off of uses spinach, so the Dragon House version that I was copying definitely uses spinach. And it was also what I remember from when I was a kid. My least favorite part about this dish was the spinach. So when I do my version, I don't use spinach because I don't like braised spinach. It's kind of gross. But if you love spinach, you could totally use it. You could also use really any other kind of veggie that you want. I would recommend any kind of leafy veggie. You could probably do it with like, that kale would work. You could do it with broccoli. You could do it with gailan, mustard greens. All of those would probably work out okay. My personal favorite is some bok choy, though. And I'm doing a couple of things here for our bok choy. So today we're using baby bok choy, which means a couple of things. Mainly what it means, though, is that it's going to be a little bit smaller than regular bok choy. So you'll notice that my bok choy usually comes around this size. And essentially what a piece of baby bok choy is, it just means that it was picked a little bit earlier, which gives us a couple of qualities that are different from full-grown bok choy. But mainly the quality that I love about it is that it's a little bit more sweet and a little bit crispier. So you don't have some of the that like biting quality that if you've ever experienced that with bok choy, where it's a little bit bitter. That's like some people like that. If you like that about full-grown bok choy, then definitely just use regular bok choy. But if you don't like that quality about bok choy, then I highly recommend using some baby bok choy instead. And pretty much any time that I work with bok choy, I'm probably going to be working with baby bok choy. Because I don't really like the taste of full-grown bok choy. But also because since it is chopped, or since it's a little bit smaller, see this piece is really, really small. Since it's a little bit smaller, we don't actually have to chop it very much. So if I was using full-grown bok choy, I would probably be cutting each piece into at least into quarters, if not more than that. But with baby bok choy, when it's this small, you don't really need to do too much with it, especially like these pieces that are really, really small. I'm not even going to chop it at all. When they're this small though, I'll usually chop it once or twice. This piece is really big, so I'm going to give it 4 chops. What we're looking for is just like a pretty small, manageable bite-sized piece of bok choy before we let that into our wok fry. So that's our bok choy, and this is going to go into our wok before we start cooking our meatballs, or right after, I suppose, but before we assemble our braise. So that's going to be the vegetable element. Alright, so last up before we head over to the stove, we're going to assemble our braising sauce. So what we're going to be doing with our meatballs today is we're going to be searing them on a couple of different sides in that wok. And then we're going to pull them out, and then we're going to add them back into the wok with our flash cooked veggies, and then braise them in a dark soy sauce based sauce. So that's going to be this sauce. It has a few different elements to it, but the ones that are really, really important, I mentioned this earlier too, is dark soy sauce and oyster sauce. Both of which are really, really important in getting that like really, really dark color. Otherwise, it's not going to look right. So if you don't have dark soy sauce, lots of people try and replace dark soy sauce with regular soy sauce, but it's not the same. Dark soy sauce is very, very different. So what I just added, that was 4 tablespoons of regular soy sauce. And this is our dark soy sauce. So if you can tell, it is much, much thicker. You can see it's even like sticking to the spoon a little bit. That's because dark soy sauce is almost like a little bit syrupy because it's so concentrated. Which means don't go too heavy on it. So I'm only using, that was a single tablespoon of dark soy sauce. I generally don't find myself using more than like a tablespoon or 2 of dark soy sauce, depending on what else is going into a sauce. But today we're using a single tablespoon, and that's going to be enough, especially if we're pairing it with a bit of oyster sauce like this. But because it's so concentrated, you really don't need a lot of it, so go easy on that stuff. Next up is a bit of Chinese cooking, or Shaoxing wine. Shaoxing wine, if you can't find it, is essentially dry cooking sherry. Dry cooking sherry is probably, if you're here in the States, might even be better than Shaoxing wine because it's probably going to be of higher quality. But honestly, I generally don't have a preference or care too much about the quality of the wines that I cook with because I can't really taste it. Some people say that you can't taste it, but I can't taste the difference. So I like using Shaoxing wine mainly because it's really, really cheap. You could buy a bottle of Shaoxing wine for like $2 or maybe $3. Whereas like a bottle of dry cooking sherry will probably run you at least $8, $10. So. Hermina, yeah, how's it going? Oh, dinner in the movie with the family. Yeah, that sounds nice. I'm doing good. How are you guys? How is everyone doing? Hello to everyone just tuning in. Yeah. Cool. Sweet chili sauce. Okay, so up next is a bit of sweet chili sauce, about 2 tablespoons worth. If you've never heard of sweet chili sauce, what I like to refer to it as is essentially the sweet and sour sauce that's like on the Lazy Susan next to the soy sauce in most Chinese restaurants. So it's probably, if you've ever eaten like egg rolls, it's that sauce. It's the sauce that you eat with the egg rolls. And it's essentially, I believe it's derived from honey, but fermented with, I think it's fermented with chilies, red chili flake. I might be wrong about that, but it has this nice sweetness to it. That gives us this nice bit of like depth of flavor, especially if you mix it into a braising sauce like what we're doing. So all of the sugar and sweetness is going to come from those 2 tablespoons of sweet chili sauce. That would be the rice. Cool. So that would be where all of the sweetness is going to come from. If you're keeping track, sweet chili sauce, it does not belong in Shanghainese cuisine. Probably, like most traditionally would come from like Vietnamese cuisine, I'd say. But I love using it in place of like a little bit of sugar, which you would probably more traditionally be using, because it has like a more interesting form of sweetness, which I love. Let's see. Last up, that was 3 tablespoons of lao gan ma, which is essentially red chili flake that is fermented in oil. And that's going to give us this nice little bit of heat. It looks really, really hot, so you can see it's like starting to coat the sides of my bowl in like really, really deep red color. It's actually not nearly as spicy as it looks. I find that it's like a pretty mellow form of heat from that lao gan ma, but because it is coated in oil, has this really, really nice pervasive quality about it that gives it the ability to just sort of like distribute across a sauce really, really well. So I love using it, especially in braising sauces, but really any kind of stir-fry sauce work really, really well because it's pretty mellow and it kind of like covers, like disperses across a stir-fry really, really well because of that oil. Don't use too much of it though, especially the oily parts of the chili oil, because otherwise it will obviously create too much oil and then your dish is going to be more oily than you want. Cool. So that's our braising sauce, and I think we're ready to cook. Okay, over on the stove, I'm heating up my wok. We're going to look for a lot of smoke to start coming off of that wok. We want that thing to be ripping hot before we start cooking. Otherwise, we're going to end up with under temperature wok. So that wok needs to be absolutely as hot as you can possibly get it before you start cooking. Otherwise, you won't be able to get the proper level of sear from your meatballs. So those things need to be really, really hot before you start cooking. Cool. So I'm going to let that heat up. It will usually takes me about a minute, maybe a minute and a half for that wok to heat up. What I like to do is look for some smoke to start coming off of that wok. And once I start seeing that smoke coming off, usually what I like to do is let it go about a minute or so past that smoke point. So once it starts smoking, then we can let it heat a little bit past that point. And then that's when we'll know we have lots and lots of heat. But most importantly, anytime that you're cooking in a wok, you want to make sure that you're not cooking in a wok that's underheated. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a very, very mushy stir fry. So if you've ever had stir fries that are like porridgey or kind of have the consistency of like oatmeal or used like old cereal, that's because it was cooked on medium heat, which especially is a problem if you've ever worked with like Teflon woks, which is obviously never going to heat up as hot as you need it to because Teflon doesn't get super hot. That's the best quality about Teflon. So. Ooh, I forgot one thing. I'm gonna do one more thing before we start cooking, which I forgot to do. Last thing that I'm gonna assemble here before we start cooking is going to be our cornstarch slurry. So the cornstarch slurry, as the name implies, is a slurry of cornstarch. So what we're doing is adding 2 tablespoons of cornstarch here, plus a little bit of water. The proportions are not super, super important. What really matters here is that we make sure that our cornstarch is dissolved properly. So what's most important about this aspect is that we don't want to be throwing dry cornstarch into a wok fry because it will clump up and then you're going to be eating clumps of cornstarch, which is not attractive. We don't want that. So you'll see my cornstarch slurry, it is liquefied. It's basically a liquid solution, which is what we need. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add that to our wok fry at the very, very end. And it's going to create all of this really, really nice thickness to our stir fry. And that's how thick sauces are developed in pretty much all Chinese wok frying. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today we're doing a Chinese dish called Lion's Head Meatball, or Shizitou. If you've never had Shizitou, it's essentially a large Chinese meatball that is seared in a wok and then removed and then braised in a dark soy sauce braise. So we're about to start cooking. If you're looking for the recipes, those all live over on my YouTube channel, which are out every Friday. So if you're watching on Reddit, it's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the channel you're already on. Those come out every Friday. So this Friday, as in tomorrow, we're coming out with a recipe for Sesame Noodles, which is, I guess, like a Szechuan dandan mian, which is going to be really, really interesting because it's actually a vegetarian dandan mian intended for like pantry-friendly meals. So that's coming out this Friday, and next Friday is going to be steamed eggs. Oh, we're doing steamed eggs, and I forget the Chinese name for steamed eggs off the top of my head right now. But that's coming out next Friday, one of my favorite breakfast dishes from Chinese cuisine. So all that stuff, it lives over on the YouTube channel, so if you haven't checked that stuff out yet, I recommend hopping over, getting in on that. So as you can see in my wok, there's all of this smoke that's starting to bellow off. That's been coming off for a while now. I haven't really been looking. But what we're looking for is all of that smoke starting to come up. And that's a sign that your wok is really, really hot, because it would not be smoking like that if it was not really, really hot. So once you start seeing that happen, that's generally when you know you're pretty much ready to start cooking. So we're going to add, this is going to be about 4 tablespoons of peanut oil here. We don't need a lot. Remember that, especially if you're working with really, really fatty ground pork like we are today. Remember that ground pork is going to start shedding off a lot of liquid fat too. So that's very, very useful because then you can go on to cook in that fat. So, but I am using, that's about 4 tablespoons of peanut oil here. And then we're going to add, I like going 4 meatballs at a time. And then I'm going to sear these on either side for about, I like to give this about 2 minutes on the first side, maybe a little bit less than that. And the most important thing to remember about searing, anytime that you're trying to sear anything, but especially ground meat, the most important part about searing something is that you have to not touch it. If you move it, if you agitate it, if you fuss with it, if you take a look, if you're not sure if it's searing and you try to like pick it up and take a look, you're going to ruin the sear. So it's super, super important and very, very concerning, because during that time, especially if you're going for 2 minutes, you're going to start wondering if you're burning the meatball, which sometimes is the case, but in this case, it's not going to burn. I promise you it's not going to burn. So try not to panic. It's going to work. So I'm going to let that go for 2 full minutes, maybe a little bit less than 2 full minutes. Because I've found that they've been burning a little bit earlier than 2 minutes, probably around like 1.5 minutes. And then we're going to move it, and then we're going to agitate and turn it and then cook it on the next side. So if you're really, really concerned, or if you're not familiar with the internal temperatures or like whether or not your meatball is cooked, what we're looking for inside is 160 degrees on the internal temperature of your meatball. I generally don't bother doing that because I've gotten pretty good at eyeballing it, but if you're very concerned or if you're not sure, get a meat thermometer, stick it in there, and make sure that it's at 160 inside. All right, let's give these a turn. So you'll notice once I flip my meatballs, we have this nice dark browning. And that's really, really important because it's going to help everything bind together really, really well. So I'm flipping everything once, and hopefully on the second side you can get the same level of sear. If you don't achieve the same quality of sear, that's okay. Usually I find that, just like with making pancakes, the second side never sears quite as well as the first side. But if we have a nice deep sear on the first side, it will really contribute to that crispiness of the meatball. We do need it to be pretty crispy. That's the real purpose of the sear. I guess the sear serves a couple of purposes, but mainly if you sear that meatball really, really well, when you go to braise it, it won't turn soggy. So if your sear is not particularly crispy, what will happen is it's essentially just going to fall apart in that braise. So by getting that really, really crispy quality to your meatball, when you long cook it in the braise, it's going to keep things from falling apart and turning into a soggy meatball. Cool. And at this point, I've found that it is really, really useful to have a round bottom wok, which you'll notice mine is. And that's because you'll notice that all four of the meatballs are meeting at the bottom, like center point of the wok. And that's really, really helpful because you can sear in a very, very small amount of oil, because all of the oil is meeting at the bottom of the wok too. So if I was doing this in a flat bottom pan, I probably would have had to use more cooking oil because it would have required more oil to coat the entire pan. But in a round bottom wok like this, everything just sort of meets at the bottom. And it's not as much of a problem. Alright, so I'm flipping my meatballs here. I think we got a broken one. Yeah, we got a broken one. Cool. Amazing how delicious this looks. Yeah, thank you. Lion's head meatball is one of my favorite dishes of all time, so there's really nothing to not like about it. It's got like this really, really dark, savory sauce to it. It's really, really crispy and like really, really savory. You could just eat the meatball themselves. It kind of reminds me of how a Swedish meatball is done, where the Swedish meatball is seared and pan fried. I believe that those things are pan fried, usually in a Dutch oven. Pan fried and then braised, usually in a cream sauce in Swedish meatballs, I think. Haven't made Swedish meatballs in a while. Usually Swedish meatballs are a little bit smaller though. So it kind of reminds me of that, because what we're essentially going to do is give this really, really quality sear on our meatballs and then add them to our braise. And that braise is going to give this really, really thick coating to it. And then what we're going to end up with is this really, really like well-coated and sauced meatball that is also really, really crispy. Cool. Karate Face. That's a great username, Karate Face. You're gonna check out the YouTube channel? Yeah, please do. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for checking out the YouTube channel. Lots of recipes going on over there. I'm really excited for the dandan mian that's coming out tomorrow. It's one of the first recipes in a while that I've actually had to repeat. I think I made that dandan mian 3 times because it was so simple. It's such a simple pantry dish that I actually messed it up in really, really small ways that ended up being like catastrophic to the entire dish. So that's what's really, really tricky about really, really simple dishes, is that really, really small mistakes have huge impacts because there's nothing to cover up your mistakes. So when I think the second time that I did it, I burnt the shallots, which I should have. I was so mad that I did, because it was the very last thing that I did in the wok fry. And it ruined the whole dish, and I had to redo it just because the shallots were burned. So that's coming up tomorrow too. So I'm just looking for like a deep browning on all sides of our meatball here. So if we're really, really concerned, you can get your meat thermometer out here and like start checking that internal temperature. I've gotten really, really good at it. I've made this meatball dish like over 10 times at this point. So I've gotten pretty good at making sure things are like cooked internally, just basically by like eyeballing it, like knowing what the exterior is supposed to look like, and generally like what the consistency of the meatball is supposed to feel like. So if it's like too squishy, or if it like still feels a little raw, all of those things that are gonna tip you off to know that like your meatball is not quite done. But if you're not sure, or if this is your first time doing it, I used to check the internal temps of these meatballs when I first started doing this dish. Look for 160 Fahrenheit inside. All right. So I'm going to repeat, we're going to do the exact same thing, but this time we have all this nice pork fat that we can start searing in, which is going to make the second batch of meatballs even better. Too many recipes. Oh, you're gonna start with the spam fried rice. Yeah, that one is one of my favorites. I used to eat a lot of spam fried rice when I was a kid. I feel like lots of people don't realize this, but spam is like really common in Hawaii. It comes up in a lot of like Hawaiian comfort food, like really like iconic Hawaiian comfort food dishes. You could get that stuff at McDonald's in Hawaii. You could get it in sushi. There's a dish called spam asubi, which is essentially sushi rice plus spam. I love eating spam. So it's one of those ingredients that's super lowbrow, but I just like it. I'm gonna keep making that dish. It's really good. Yeah, cool. Edgar apple pole, that's also a good username. Yeah, let me know if you try that recipe. That's one of my favorites. Also one of like, probably one of the more approachable dishes too, mostly because it's like really cheap. You can make that dish for like, I don't know, like $2 a serving or something. So that's a good pantry dish. But also because it's pretty easy. It's a pretty easy and like pretty approachable spam fried rice. Cool. You're gonna try these this week? Oh, cool. Yeah, Karate Paste. Let me know how that goes. Let me know when you try it, and let me know how it goes. It's like a relative. If you're like familiar with how to make meatballs, so if you've ever made like Italian meatballs, or like I mentioned this before, Swedish meatballs, it's like pretty familiar. It's gonna feel pretty familiar because it's basically the same way that all other meatballs are made, except that you're doing it in a wok. That's the main difference. Alright, so I'm flipping my meatballs and then we're going to start searing on the next side here. So what we're looking for is just like a good browning on all sides here. So try and be patient and try not to agitate it too much. If you move it around too much, it's not going to sear properly, and then you're going to get like kind of like a mediocre sear and like just like a thorough browning on all sides, but it's not going to sear properly, so it's not going to be quite as crispy. And then what you'll end up with is probably like more the consistency of like a hamburger patty, which is like a little bit rubbery, which is not going to be good. You don't want to eat a meatball like that. But while that's going, we can take a look at our finished meatballs. Not that I can show you this. So we can take a look while that's cooking. Here's our finished meatballs. You can see we have all of this really nice dark browning here, so some people might even say that's a little bit burned. Right here, that's a little bit burned, but for the most part, we have all of this really deep browning. Things like that, all of that crispiness, that's going to be really important in our wok fry, because that's going to be how we get like those meatballs to hold together and not like fall apart when you start braising them. So if you've ever tried to braise a meatball and they don't quite hold together, they sort of just like crumble, that's because they weren't quite seared or par cooked correctly. All right. All right, I'm rotating one more time and we're just going for that all-around browning. Have I ever cheated and peaked early? I have absolutely done that, and 100% of the time it's ruined the sear. So frustrating, but I can't stress how important it is. When you're trying to sear something, stop touching it. Just stop touching it. That's especially true for meatballs, but it's also true if you've ever done one of the crispy fried rice recipes that I've done. So there's like a crispy bacon fried rice, there's a crispy spam fried rice. I think the spam fried rice is crispy, I forget. Anything that requires a sear though, you can't touch it at least a minute and a half. Usually I like to go for, especially with the rices, 2.5 minutes minimum on high heat. If you touch it too early, it just ruins the sear. Especially if you touch it really early and start flipping it, then it's not going to work. So, yeah, wok balls. Yeah, Charlie, that's essentially what it is a wok ball. I guess that's essentially what all meatballs are. Cool. The other thing I'll mention is like you may notice that these meatballs are much larger than like a standard meatball, especially like if you're comparing it to like Italian meatballs. Well, sometimes you get large meatballs in Italian food, but they are pretty large. They're relatively the size of a tennis ball, maybe a little bit bigger than a tennis ball, closer to like a baseball. And that's like the iconic quality about Lion's Head meatballs, that they're really, really large. And then they're served family style, so everyone gets like a meatball or something. When I was a kid, we used to get half a meatball each. And then like we used to like fight over the leftover sauce, because you can still eat the sauce after you eat the meatball. But that's like a really, really iconic part about Lion's Head meatball, is that it's really, really large. All right. Some of these need a little bit more time. Yeah, this one needs more time. Cool. Yeah, really large wok balls. Yeah, that's a very good description of Lion's Head meatball. Cool. All right. Yeah, these are good. All right, real quick, we could take a look one more time at our finished meatball. Not if the camera's not on. There it is. All right, so here's our finished meatballs. Take a good look. They are like very, very dark. We have that nice dark crispiness and qualities to it that are like really, really going to be super crunchy. So you could even eat this right now and it would probably be really tasty because we seasoned it really well. And all of that crispiness is going to be really, really flavorful. What we're going to do next, though, before we move on and start cooking these meatballs up, is we're going to clear out our wok and then reheat it and then flash cook our veggies next. So super, super important, though. You'll notice we have all of this leftover pork fat. So normally I've always been a big proponent of saving pork fat because pork fat is so delicious. But that is way more pork fat than you want to cook with because it will absolutely not work in a wok fry. You don't want that much pork fat. So usually what I like doing is removing a little bit of it, or actually we probably have to move all of it, mostly because we need to clean our wok out. So when you sear something, it creates a lot of leftover bits and pieces of fat. So I believe fond comes from Italian. That might be true. I think that's true. In Italian cooking, you call it fond. Fond is really, really important for flavor. It's especially important for developing gravies because it has all of this flavor to it. So in our case, we don't want any of that to stick around because it will start to cause problems with our sauce, and you're going to get little bits of burnt pieces in your sauce. So we have to rinse that out. Kind of a bummer because that's a lot of flavor that we just dumped. But super, super important. Don't let that stuff get into your sauce because you're going to have burnt stuff in your sauce afterward, which is not fun. It's not what we're after. So what I just did was I gave my wok a quick rinse. Actually, I should say the first thing that I did is before I rinsed the wok out, that's way too much fat to dump down your drain. So what I did is I dumped it into a grease trap. Over here I have my jar of used fat here, and that goes when it's full next to my fryer oil. Don't dump that stuff down your drain. Never, ever, ever dump animal fat, especially like cooking oil, down your drain because it's going to clog your drain, and then you're going to have a very, very clogged sink really, really quickly. So before you clean your wok out, dump out that fat first, and then rinse your wok, and then reheat it. So if you've properly seasoned your wok, that stuff should come right off, and then we should have a clean wok with a real quick rinse. Real Steve's Woo, yeah, that's me. How's it going? Cool, so once you give it a rinse, we're gonna reheat it. That's gonna take maybe a minute and a half. And once we have real hot wok again, we're gonna start our wok fry and we're gonna finish up. Cool. Yeah. Who doesn't eat a meatball with Maggie? Yeah. It's a real temptation, but these meatballs are gonna taste way better when they're done in that braise. But yeah, it's a real big temptation. If I had like 20, if I was doing Swedish meatballs, for sure I would eat a meatball because Swedish meatballs are much smaller, so you could eat one and you would still have like 25 left, so you'd be fine. But with these, there's only 8 of them, so I would rather eat them in the wok fry. That's very true, though. I'm totally on that. Cool. One more time, I'll introduce myself. Hello to everyone just joining. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today we're cooking a Chinese or Shanghainese dish called lion's head meatball or Shizitou. It's one of the dishes that I've been eating since I was a little kid. It's one of my favorite Chinese comfort foods because I used to eat it like all the time, probably a couple times a month. The version that we're cooking today is based off of a recipe that I came out with over on the YouTube channel a couple of months ago, where we like kind of walked through some of the decision making that goes behind how I like assembled this recipe and like where I kind of strayed from some of the places where I was deriving inspiration from. So the original inspiration for this recipe comes from a restaurant here in San Francisco called Dragon's House. That original version uses spinach, which I very, very much disliked when I was a kid. I think partially because I hated spinach when I was a kid, but also partially it's just like it gets a little bit floppy, and it's just generally like not an appealing veggie to eat in a braise. So I have substituted that spinach out with Bok Choy instead. What we're using is baby Bok Choy. So if you're interested, definitely check out some of those recipes. Those all over on the YouTube channel. And they come out every Friday, so if you're paying attention, today's Thursday, so which means tomorrow we're coming out with a recipe for a sesame sauce noodle, which is going to be a real pantry-friendly dish. And then we'll be cooking through it live on Monday. So if you're looking for those recipes or the schedule of the live streams, that all lives over on YouTube, which is youtube.com/WuCanCook. Lots of fun content coming up over there. Have a couple of series that are in progress right now. Probably the one that everyone's really stoked on is the Chinese American Hack series, where we've been like cooking through a lot of iconic dishes from Chinese American cuisine. So things like General Tso's chicken and honey sesame chicken, things like that. Kind of taking a look at what those dishes would look like if they were actually traditionally Chinese. So if we did General Tso's chicken, but in the context of like traditional wok cooking, what would it look like? Which is really interesting because a lot of those things are not actually Chinese, they're just American. So it's trying to like create traditional Chinese versions of basically American food, which is really fun. So if you're interested in stuff like that, hop over to the YouTube, check out what's going on over there. Those are out every Friday, so lots of fun stuff coming up. All right, so my wok is reheated one more time. You'll notice all of that smoke is starting to come off once again, which is a good sign. That means that we have a very, very hot wok. And we're ready to start stir frying. So I'm adding, that's another maybe 3 tablespoons of peanut oil. That's a little bit less than 4 tablespoons. We don't need a lot. I think we need a little bit more than that. We don't need a lot of peanut oil, but we do need a good amount because we have to cook all of our bok choy. So. Going in first are my aromatics. So this is my ginger first, followed by my garlic. And we're going to let that go for just long enough until it's fragrant. So I usually like to say about 10 seconds, but start using your nose, and when you start smelling garlic and ginger, that's when you know you're ready to go. Kind of depends on how hot the wok is. So. All right. Next up is my bok choy. You'll notice, or you'll start to notice, that bok choy is going to lose a lot of volume, so very similar to what will happen if you were trying to saute spinach. All of the leafy parts of my bok choy, so like all of this stuff, it's going to start wilting pretty soon, which is going to reduce the volume of our bok choy by about half. And that's one of the 2 things that we're trying to do here is number 1 is reduce the volume of our bok choy, but number 2, and super, super important, is we're just trying to cook off some of that rawness. So we're not looking for like really, really tender or like sauteed veggies here. What we're mainly looking for is like to take that bok choy like right past the raw stage of bok choy. So we're not trying to eat raw bok choy, but we're also not trying to eat like sauteed or like mushy bok choy. We want it to be just past that raw state. Fridge reveal. Oh yeah. Yeah, sorry, Kim. Oh, and Gruto. Yeah, I know that I did promise a fridge tour, so I'll probably, and I think I have the camera set up for that. So if you stick around to the very, very end, I'm gonna have to like move some cameras around. But if you stick around to the very, very end, I should have a camera that's ready to go for something like that. Yeah. How hot is the wok? Oh, yeah. Good question. The wok is as hot as you can get it. So, lots of people are afraid of wok cooking because they think that you can't get the same temperature. Well, you definitely can't get the same temperatures that in a wok that you would if you were cooking on a restaurant range, which is actually true. But it doesn't mean that you can't cook in a wok on a home range. It just means that we have to approach the wok fries a little bit differently. So, the main thing that you have to do is keep a close eye on how full the wok is. So in this case, we actually don't need to do any batch cooking because that's everything that we're going to be cooking. But if I were to add anything else to the wok at this point, it would start becoming a problem because I would start losing a lot of heat. But in our case, we're pretty much done cooking. So there's not really anything else to stir fry. So I'm going to start moving forward. But yeah, to answer your question, it's as hot as you can get it. My burner is on as hot as it will go. So I'm adding my meatballs back, followed by my braising sauce. And you could use beef stock at this point. I'm just going to use a little bit of water here because I ran out of stock. Yeah, a little bit more water. And you want to be careful at this point. Be really, really careful at this point. Because if you're too aggressive with the wok tossing at this point, those meatballs are very, very fragile. They will start to break. And if you've ever broken a meatball in a wok fry, it is the most disappointing thing that you could possibly do because they're not going to be as crispy if they fracture. So you're running on a 100,000 BTUs. That's definitely hot enough for sure. Yeah, that's for sure hot enough. Cool. All right, so I'm being real gentle at this point because I'm trying not to bake any meatballs. I saw that one was about to break. And I'm just gonna let that go for a good long braise here. So not super long, but mainly what I'm looking for is the consistency of that sauce. I want it to reduce a little bit, and then we should be ready to add our cornstarch and eat up. Cool. What kind of water is brown? Yeah. So it's actually water that I added to the bowl of the sauce. So essentially what I was doing is rinsing off some of that water. Or some of that leftover sauce mixture. Cool. All right. Last thing that I'm adding here is my cornstarch slurry, which I mentioned before is just 2 tablespoons of cornstarch that's dissolved in water. And that's going to give us that nice thick consistency to our sauce here. And you'll notice that as soon as I added that cornstarch, our sauce starts tightening up and we have this nice thick cohesive sauce. That should about do it. Do I ever pinch the cornstarch between my fingers? I've never tried that. But yeah, cornstarch has a weird texture to it for sure. Cool. Let's change these cameras before I move this wok. There we go. Just fogged up the lens. Here we go. Cool. So the very last thing that we want to do anytime that we cook in a wok, especially a carbon steel wok, is give it a rinse and make sure that it's nice and clean before you leave it. If you leave leftover sauce, so you probably saw there was some sauce left behind on my wok. Don't leave that stuff in your wok. If it cools down with all of that in the wok, you're going to end up with stuff stuck to the wok. So it's going to be a lot harder to get that stuff off of the wok once you're done cooking, once it cools down, because it's gonna start sticking and crystallizing, doing a lot of stuff that you don't want to happen in your wok, because you generally will have to start scrubbing, and scrubbing is a real big enemy of carbon steel. It's not the end of the world, but I generally like to avoid doing that if at all possible. So what I did is I just gave it a quick rinse. Pretty much everything came off. Almost everything came off. There's looks like a little bit of debris still behind. Might actually rinse this one more time. But for the most part, my wok is pretty clean at this point. Yeah, second rinse seemed to do the trick. And then what I'm going to do is reheat it and then give it a little bit of extra oil, and that's going to keep things from carbonizing. So we're adding a little bit of oil back to the wok, about a tablespoon. And then I'm just coating everything in that oil to make sure that we don't end up oxidizing our wok. And that requires both sides of the wok, so everywhere that the wok has carbon steel, make sure that that's coated in oil. Otherwise, you're going to break the wok. How to do it. Alright. Was the heat all the way up the whole cook? Yes. So I generally don't. You generally won't see me touching the temperature of the heat in a wok fry. That's what makes wok cooking, like timing in wok cooking, so difficult. Is because the heat is all the way up the entire time. So it's hot for literally the entire time that you're cooking, which makes it tricky because there's no, it's not a very, very forgiving cooking surface because it's so hot. So if you don't have everything ready to go before you start cooking, you're going to start running into problems because you're going to start either burning things or undercooking things. And if you're still doing stuff and moving things around and trying to chop things while you're trying to cook in the wok, you're gonna mess something up. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, it was at high heat, or as hot as it would possibly get for the entire time. Cool. Am I in the restaurant biz? I'm not. Well, I guess technically I am. I guess I am now. I work for an organization called Chef, which is essentially food delivery. So I do food prep for an organization called Chef. And if you live in the Bay Area, you can actually order some of the food that I cook on stream. So if you happen to live in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can find me on Chef and order some food. You can probably order some takeout. Usually things that I cook on stream. Yeah. Let's taste this. Yeah. This is one of my favorite dishes. Super flavorful, really, really savory, a deep, deep umami from that braising sauce. The meatballs are still nice and crunchy, really crispy. Also really, really tender from the panko. If you don't like panko, if you're not familiar with panko, you can also use cornstarch. I found that the cornstarch doesn't yield quite as tender of a meatball, but if you're avoiding gluten, though, that's a really good solution. Just when you run out of meatballs too, that braising sauce is so good that you could probably just put it over rice, and it will be equally as tasty. That's what I used to do when we were kids, as we used to fight over the last meatball, and whoever didn't get the last meatball got the rest of the braising sauce. So One of my favorite things to cook for dinner a lot is this meatball dish. Cool. Let's see here. There we go. Yeah. Cool. North Beach Films, yeah, thank you. Yeah. All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out every Friday. So tomorrow is a Friday. So we're coming up with a dandan mian, which is a sesame paste noodle dish. If you've been following the channel, we actually did another dandan mian that came out, I think, sometime mid last year. But it was a more Americanized version of dandan mian where we used peanut butter instead of sesame paste, which, in my opinion, that's one of my more favorite ways of eating dandan mian is with peanut butter. Because when I was a kid, that's how we used to eat dandan mian, was with peanut butter. So a lot of the things that I eat, or generally like, come from pretty traditional Chinese cooking, but are like Americanized in weird ways because that's how we used to eat them when we were kids. So yeah, Gruto. Yeah, it is up on the YouTube channel. So if you're looking for this recipe, it all lives over on the YouTube channel. Here's the link. All of those recipes that live over on YouTube, those are out every Friday. So this recipe came out, I think, sometime in December, November or December, I forget. I think it was November or December of last year. So kind of recently. And in those recipe videos, we usually like talk a little bit slower and kind of move through some of the decision making that goes behind the things that I'm doing, and like why I add some stuff and why I leave some stuff out, and like kind of where a lot of the inspirations are coming from these dishes. So if you're looking for those recipes, they all live over on YouTube. Lots of fun stuff going on over there. So if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel, we're working our way to 3,500 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit the subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Lots of fun content coming up every Friday, new recipes, and every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday we were live streaming. So if you're also looking for the schedule of the live streams, that all lives over there. So if you were watching on YouTube, you would have known a couple of weeks ago that I'd be cooking this dish. And then what else? Oh yeah, there's a couple of series that are in progress. This lion's head meatball dish comes from a series that I've been doing where I've been reproducing a lot of recipes from restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area. So this one comes from a restaurant in San Francisco called Dragon House, which closed down a couple of years ago. But when I was a kid, I used to eat there all the time, probably like a couple times a month, because my parents knew the owners. So we used to eat there a lot. There's a whole bunch of different things that come from like the Oakland restaurant scene though. I cook a lot of stuff from like, I live in Oakland, Chinatown, so a lot of the things are coming from restaurants that I basically live around the corner from and eat out all the time. So lots of things like that. There's a bibimbap recipe coming up that's based off of, where's that coming from? Oh, Bold on Telegraph Avenue. So if you happen to live in Oakland, that's coming up in a couple of weeks. The recipe coming out tomorrow is a dandan mian that's based off of, actually someone from the Oakland subreddit requested this, but it is based off of good to eat dumplings in Oakland, which is super, super fun. So that's been a fun series to dive into. What else? There's another series that's entirely based off of things from TV and film, which is really fun. We just did Egg Foo Young from based off of, or inspired by the movie The Aristocrats from the like 70s or 80s. That was fun. I recently found out that it got pulled from Disney Plus, and I found out that they also reference Egg Foo Young, so I used it as my inspiration for doing an Egg Foo Young recipe, which is cool. Yeah, lots of fun content coming up over on YouTube, so if you haven't checked that out, hop over and give it a subscribe. Cool. Oh yeah, Hermina, every time you've made this, you've either missed or you've either missed it. Okay, how does the bok choy taste? Yeah. It tastes like, how do I explain it? So it's, if you've ever had full-grown bok choy, it's like has a quality about it that where it's like a little bit bitter, and that comes from I think it comes from the flowers that develop when bok choy grows to full maturity. So it doesn't have quite as much of that bitterness. So it's really, really crispy and has this like a very like crisp and fresh taste to it. It has a hint of sweetness, but you can't quite taste the sweetness in the braise anymore because it's like covered in a whole bunch of braising sauce. So you can't really taste the sweetness of the bok choy. Mostly what you get out of it is the texture of it. So it's still really, really crispy because it's just barely flash cooked. So you have this really, really crispy piece of veggie that's coated in a very, very deep and like very, very savory sauce, which is a really, really nice contrast to like the tenderness of the meatball. So one of my favorite ways of eating bok choy, probably not super healthy because it's covered in soy sauce, but one of my favorite ways of eating bok choy. If you're trying to keep bok choy healthy, this is not a good one. But one of my favorite ways of doing it because it's super, super tasty. So what you mostly end up getting out of it though, is like the quality, the textural qualities of it and like the crispiness of it. But definitely by avoiding full-grown bok choy, you avoid that really, really bitter taste to bok choy, which would definitely pop out if we were using full-grown bok choy. So anytime that I cook with bok choy, you'll probably see me using baby bok choy. And the difference is like full-grown bok choy would probably be about this big. Or I don't have it on camera. It would be probably about this big, and we would have to like chop it in half, probably chop it into like thirds or fourths before even starting to dice it up. So cool. Yeah, cool. I think I got everyone. Let me know if I missed any questions. I know I miss questions in the chat all the time, but if I missed anything, feel free and repeat yourself. I'll be around here doing dishes, and we'll be back. Oh, tomorrow we're having dandam mian is coming out tomorrow, which means Monday next week we're coming out with the live stream for dandam mian. So we'll be cooking. We're coming out with the recipe for dandam mian on Friday, and Monday next week we'll be cooking through it. So I'll see you next week. Thanks everyone. Bye.
You're as sweet strawberry wine, your bed, warm, glass of brandy, darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time.
Slow. If you come over and start up a conversation with just me, then trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now take my hand, stop, put Ben the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. Now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me, said boy. Let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead.
I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. And last night you were in my room. And now my bed sheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. Wow, 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 wow. day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you.
One weekend, we let the story begin. We're going out on our first date. You and me are thrifty, so go all you can eat. Fill up your bag and I fill up a plate. We talk for hours and hours about the sweet and the sour and how your family is doing okay. We'll even get in a taxi, we'll kiss in the backseat, tell the driver make the radio play. Now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Said, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead.
I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. And last night you were in my room. And now my bedsheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you.
Come on, be my baby, come on. 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 Come on, be my baby, come on.
Come on, be my baby, come on.